legacy for our children of the future.
And this ballpark will never be forgotten, certainly by us and any of the great White Sox fans who have visited this great baseball palace in the last 80 years.
All right, stay with us as Al Janis will be with you for the finale and the post-game show right after this.
Hey everybody, Tom Bartlett, stories from the 70th game. We're talking about Bridgeport by way of Boston and of the book called Last Comiskey, about Old Comiskey Park as we know in Chicago. And my friend Ken here has some roots in Chicago as well. How you doing, sir?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And this book, I think in Chicago especially, people have this maybe not even rose-colored glasses, but they definitely have this love affair, this affinity for Old Comiskey Park because of what they built after Comiskey Park, right? And now here we are again talking about getting rid of a ballpark that opened up in 1991. So, and I don't think anybody's going to cry too many tears over the current Comiskey versus what happened to the old Comiskey, right?
Yeah, I'm fully in favor of this move to the 78 parcel. I could not be more adamant about my desire to get off of that street corner and out of that ballpark. It hasn't been that great of a corner for the White Sox in the last 100 and 20 years now, 110 years now.
It's a good point.
Let's try to go a couple miles north, see if things change. So, but I like the new park design, the preliminary design. It is somewhat evocative of the feel of what Old Comiskey was like in its shape and how close it seems like the upper deck would be to the field. But, you know, no one will cry, as you correctly pointed out, any tears about the loss of New Comiskey. And I think it would be a great stadium to adapt for soccer for the Chicago Fire. I think it would be fantastic. And then I think everyone would win. You know, who's going to pay for it? Let's figure that out later. Probably not something for us to decide, but
Right.
I think it's a great plan for the city. I think that would really revitalize that South Loop area. And I'm fully in favor of it.
I think I might have said Lost Comiskey. It's Last Comiskey.
Last Comiskey, correct.
Yeah, the name of the book. I apologize about that. And that's kind of like a double entendre because it's also about the last season of that ballpark, where you kind of document through a lot of help from a lot of people, including Nancy Faust, who played the organ, among other people, sports and what have you, compiled all these pictures into this book, including your own, that sat in boxes perhaps for years to have them develop, right? And so what happened? Like, what made you want to do this? Were you going through stuff like, man, I got some good stuff here. I should put a book together, because there is nothing out there really that you want to, like, because that's like a palace of baseball. I love baseball, and I'm so mad as a baseball fan in Chicago that they tore down. Like, if they would have done what they did to Wrigley, to Old Comiskey, it would be the crown jewel of baseball.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even better if they had done something like what they did to Fenway, which was a slightly more tasteful modernization than what they did with Wrigley, which I kind of consider to be a little out of scale for the ballpark in the neighborhood. But leaving that aside, so I've been a photographer for my entire life, since going back to 1982 when I first brought my camera to Old Comiskey Photo Day and caught pictures of the team in their new cool uniforms, and Bull Lazinski and Carlton Fisk and Harold Baines. And ever since then, I was hooked on taking pictures of baseball, sports, stadiums. Over the years, I've amassed a collection of photographs of 2,300 different stadiums throughout the world.
Wow.
Not always games.
You have a website, right?
Yeah, so it's stadiumvagabond.com, which is my blog, which is a sports travel blog, which kind of fuses the notion of traveling, but traveling with the goal of going to a sporting event and experiencing that sporting event in another city, another culture, another country. So I had thousands and thousands of photos that for years people were saying, do something with this. And finally, COVID gave me an opportunity. I found myself with some time on my hands. Matt Flesh, the documentarian behind the Last Comiskey documentary, put out a call for photos, and I contributed a bunch of photos that served as transitions in the film. And the film was super well received. And afterwards, I said to Matt, listen, we should put this into book form. I've got so many hundreds of photos that you haven't used. Why don't we take the interviews, transcribe them, and add some new content and material and really give Sox fans something that they can treasure that's a real tangible memory of what Old Comiskey Park is or was. And I have probably over 400 photos, I think about 450 photos in the book, most of which are of Old Comiskey, most of which have never been seen before. They were in negatives, in boxes in my storage room, and just collecting dust. And it was a labor of love putting them all together and restoring a lot of these negatives, many of which date back from 1982 even. But the last year of Old Comiskey, I made it a priority to make sure that I photographed every nook and cranny of the ballpark. I took a couple days off of work from my summer jobs at the point I was in college. I was a freshman in college, just turning a sophomore. And I photographed every corner of the outside, the facade, the parking lot, all the different entrances, ticket booths, etc. And then did the same thing on the inside, not just the ballpark in the field, but underneath the concourse, little minutia, such as a statue in deep center field under the concourse that never really made much sense. The only disappointing thing was when I finally really got going with this project, it was later in the summer, and the team had already removed a lot of the signage and artwork that they later used for an auction in 1991 for charity. So I missed a couple things that I would have loved. The shower was already gone by the time I got to center field to take those photos, for example. And then I was lucky enough to get a press pass for one game, due to the fact that I was on the Michigan Daily student newspaper, and a Michigan alum, Jim Abbott, for the California Angels, great pitcher, known for two things. One, he had a big no-hitter for the Yankees, and two, he only had one arm. It still was an outstanding pitcher. In any event, I had a press pass to interview him, and it enabled me to get some behind-the-scenes photos of Old Comiskey. I got into the locker room and photographed Jeff Torborg, the manager at the time, in his clubhouse office. I got to go into the bullpen, into the bench in the areas of the bullpen, and a few other areas that really give a view of what Old Comiskey looked like. And then you combine it with, that was just a great season. The team did really well and challenged.
People forget that.
Yeah, they challenged the chemically enhanced Oakland A's as much as they could, and the A's were just filled with guys who we later found out were juicing more than any other team, and they held close all season long, and it was super exciting. Kind of masked a little of the depression and sadness of Sox fans losing what was tantamount to a family member in many ways. But I'm really proud of how the book turned out, and I think White Sox fans and baseball fans alike will like it. Even Cub fans, I think a lot of them have spoken on my social media about their reverence for Old Comiskey, kind of acknowledging that it was really a true ballpark and a distinctive one at that. No other park was like it. Maybe Tiger Stadium was close, but no other ballpark was like it.
Yeah, another one you wish they would have figured out some way to, if not play baseball in it anymore, keep it for historical reasons. I mean, not like they're needing the room in Detroit, at least not at that time. I mean, it was,
certainly.
But for those of us who have never, and I unfortunately I never got into Old Comiskey. I grew up a Cubs fan, so you can imagine when they knocked that place down, everybody in my family was like, "Well, good luck to them." But as a baseball lover, is my. If I could go back in time, I would go back to 1919 and see that team play. Forget the whole scandal, but just see what baseball was like in Chicago in 1919, or even I think it was 08 or 07 when they lost to the White Sox in the World Series.
06. But it predates Comiskey by 4 years. One of the interesting things I learned during my research is Comiskey Park only hosted one championship team ever, and it was not the White Sox. It was the Chicago Cardinals, which, by the way, coincidentally, got my Chicago Cardinals shirt today.
Oh, yeah. People forget that they played in Chicago.
Yeah, they played not just there. They played there more than any other stadium that they've played in. And they won in 1947, the only team to have won a championship in Comiskey. The Chicago Sting soccer team didn't win. The White Sox didn't win. The Negro League American Giants didn't win in Comiskey. When the White Sox won in 1917, it was in New York at the Polo Grounds. So they never got a chance to celebrate on that field with that noise that emanated from those twin stands. So it's really, it's a shame.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, one of my questions for those of us who've never been there. What was it like to go to a game there? And I preface that with, what was it like to go to a game when it was a full house versus not so full house? Because they both have different charms about them.
Yeah, the crazy thing about Old Comiskey Park was you could have 5,000 fans in a late September cold game, and there was noise always, because there was an echo that existed because it was completely an enclosed ballpark other than the center field scoreboard. And when it was full, the noise was deafening, and I had nowhere to go. And it was just one of the most exciting things to see and hear and feel. The building would literally kind of shake. One of the most special things was when there was a home run hit. And that's what hooked me as a kid, because that captured all the elements of Old Comiskey. You had the scoreboard going off, which was Bill Veeck's old exploding scoreboard that dated back to 1960, rebuilt in 1982, but essentially a similar structure where the pinwheels shot out the fireworks, they spun, they whizzed around, there were noise, there were sirens. And then to follow that while you're hearing the fans cheering and feeling the building vibrate, you have Nancy Faust on the organ playing Na 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 Hey Hey Goodbye with all the fans singing. And it was really a robust feeling at the time. And then afterwards, you'd smell the fireworks, kind of sulfur after effects. If you were lucky enough to have back-to-back homers, it would kind of linger in that enclosed ballpark for a while. And it's just something that is different than anything else that you see today. As a kid, I always wanted just to make sure the White Sox hit at least one home run rather than win, because that was one of the things that you always would remember as a kid.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, and you took nook and cranny photos of the space. Like, when you did that, was there something that you found where you're like, holy crap, I didn't know this was here?
It was a lot of little things in the concourses. Like I said, there was that one weird statue with a fountain in deep center field. But one of the things that I just discovered was taking photos outside of the park was almost as enjoyable. There were so many different elements of the park, but it was built over a period of time. It started and was built in 1910 by architect Zachary Taylor Davis, who later went on to build Wrigley Field, now known as Wrigley, for the Chicago Whales. There's little details that you saw that when he expanded the park, and he was behind that as well, in the 20s to accommodate the Babe Ruth Yankees, and also for football to some degree, because those crowds were a little bit larger. You would see that the stadium had been expanded. You kind of see the seams. You see little parts that were added on for elevators and whatnot. And you could see it was pieced together over 80 years. And it was beautiful in many ways. There was an elegance to the arches that were throughout the entire facade, where you could see into the park from the neighborhood and out into the neighborhood from the park. And anytime you see an old baseball card, you'll always notice those arches, because for some reason, all the American League teams always had their photos done at Comiskey, or a lot of them. And it was based in some part on the Roman Coliseum. If you look, and I have pictures showing side by side, you can see the arches and the way that they line the outside of the Roman Coliseum. Architect Davis used that as inspiration, along with a prairie-style Chicago architecture, as well as he designed churches. So he wanted to make it feel a little bit like a cathedral. And it certainly had that element to it, despite the fact that there was 80 years of beer soaked through really every pore of the stadium.
Was it as bad as a condition as people say it was?
I don't know if it was. I mean, there certainly needed to be upgrades. I moved to Boston back in the 90s, and I would say it was as good, if not better, than Fenway. And Fenway's been rebuilt beautifully. It probably wasn't as kept up as well as Wrigley, but I think that if the money was spent and there was desire, they could have really kept it, if not kept it as a ballpark. I wish they did something like what they did in a lot of other stadiums in Canada. You see it, and in the UK. One of my favorite soccer teams is Arsenal Football Club, and they had a stadium built in 1913 called Highbury. Well, they kept the historic facade, and they turned it into apartments, flats. And so still where fans would go just watch games for years, now people live there and they can see what the park, what the stadium used to look like. This was something like that had been retained of Old Comiskey. Turn it to a parking lot, to shopping, anything. I think that they could have kept some elements of it. And given the importance of the architecture to the city of Chicago and baseball, it's really a shame that they didn't do that. They just wanted to get it out of the way as quickly as they could.
Yeah, which is just now and they haven't really said it, but they're saying it by wanting a new ballpark. They're kicking themselves for not, not doing something with or like, I mean, I know it cost the Ricketts family like $400 million to like redo Wrigley about almost 10 years ago now, probably something half that much back in the 90s to redo a ballpark, and they probably thought that was astronomical. But like, as a baseball fan I've been to Old Yankee Stadium, I've been to Fenway, to realize that Chicago could have had two of those stadiums.
Yeah.
Oh, it's such a kick in the pants to realize.
It really is.
Oh.
And then you look at what we've had since 1991, and listen, I'll give them credit. They've made it better, but it's still vastly inferior. I've been to all the ballparks. I've been to about 450 ballparks in the world, and New Comiskey is not faring too well by comparison to a lot of other ones, especially the subsequent 12 that were built after New Comiskey. It's really a shame, and that's why I kind of like that new design. It feels a little like Old Comiskey, not exactly the same, but it's evocative of it.
I almost wish they would add a little bit more of it, just get that porch feeling a little bit. I know they added, one of the renderings had it, but like, the arches would be great, to seeing through the park, especially, I know you have that openness that they have in the center field, but and the scoreboard, but man, oh man, it was something else. And I imagine going, spending your early years at Old Comiskey, was the food just as good as it is? I mean, that's the one thing that
it was always
about the White
great.
Sox. The food is fantastic, even at the new place.
Cubs fans always reluctantly admit that the Sox food is a little bit better. It's always been the case.
Yeah.
Bill Veeck really prioritized food, and not just food, the smell. He always wanted there to be fresh popped popcorn, so that when you walked in, you had that movie theater kind of feeling. You smell the grilled onions. Sure, you have the 80 years of frat room floor kind of stale beer, but I remember it vividly. Sox fans from that era can remember the smell of that ballpark. And it's just not the same with the new one. The new one's very sanitized. Modern ballparks, all the service levels on the bottom level, and it's separated from the fans. Whereas in Old Comiskey, the players had to go from their parking lot through the concourse to get to their dugout. And there's all kinds of stories you'll hear about players over the years going across the street to grab a hot dog or food or something like that, and interacting with the fans. And I've got a few pictures of the concourse to show it, as well as the locker room. But it was a special place. One of the things for me that was sad, but at least in some ways gave a last chance to say goodbye. I vended at New Comiskey in 91 to 3. And in 91, little by little, they were tearing it down. And while it was extremely depressing, it opened up the ballpark and you could see inside one last time. I've got a whole host of photos from that era and the demolition in the book. And you could see it. It was sad, like seeing a decaying relative. But it was like one last time that you could at least admire it.
Yeah, and I'm guessing when you were telling folks that you were making this book, I mean, your foreword is with Ozzie Guillén, talking about the ballpark and the historical significance of it. I imagine you had a lot of that, maybe from people you didn't even think would want to share stuff with you, but did. Just to talk about this thing. I mean, every time you look back on something, especially with baseball, it is rose-colored glasses. But in this case, I mean, Old Comiskey, she was old, but she was beautiful.
Yeah, there wasn't, listen, they had a lot of work to bring it up to date in modern standards, but it was doable. And it was such a great park in terms of the sight lines. Those upper decks were on top of the field. Yeah. And those were the great seats. In the book, Chuck Garfien talks about that those were the sneaky best seats. being in the first or third base side in the upper deck in the first few rows, you could see everything. You're on top of the team. And modern ballparks is not the same because they push up the upper decks with
I
the
hate
supporting
that. It's
beams.
far away.
Yeah, and then you throw in skyboxes, modern building techniques where it's not as steep as it used to be. And you get a different feel. The closest you could feel that way would be PNC Park in Pittsburgh. But not many of the modern ballparks really have that feel that Old Comiskey had. And it was I think people do have some rose-colored glasses. Ozzie Guillén's an interesting one, because at the time he spoke frequently about in the media about let's get the hell out of here, let's get to the new park. And
well, because it was probably crap on the inside for the players.
Yeah, well, the locker
same thing
room
at Wrigley
horrible.
Field before. Yeah.
The locker room was horrible. It was really small. They had redone the dugouts in 1982 and enlarged them a little bit. But it was horrible. But he spoke then about how he wanted to get out of that park. Now he speaks about how New Comiskey seemed like it was great until you saw Camden and Coors Field and Comerica, et cetera, et cetera. And now he thinks, it's one of the ugliest concrete parks around. And now he looks back at Old Comiskey with a lot more reverence than he used to. But it's interesting to see how he, in particular, as someone who bridged the old ballpark to the new ballpark, really understood it because he was a player at both. And then you throw in, and he was a manager as well. He's one that really got to know both ballparks.
As a diehard fan, and you've been a fan since you were a kid, even out in Boston, your allegiance is still here to Chicago as far as the sports. How do you feel that the ownership has handled the team, the current ownership? And are you in favor of perhaps maybe somebody else giving it a try with maybe they are the ones who should design a new stadium, or do you think this should be Jerry's legacy? There's a lot of debate in the city about it.
I'm paying close attention. One of the great things about being an out-of-town fan now is it's almost as if I'm there. I can listen to the podcast, read the social media, see all the games, etc. So I'm very in tune with it. Listen, it's no secret that a lot of Sox fans were really disappointed with the way that it was handled in the 80s with the ballpark. I don't know if Reinsdorf should be the one to develop the new ballpark, but I think it is definitely time to think about new ownership, as he's getting older and nearing retirement. I've read enough about that's afoot, or at least partially the motivation behind doing something new with the new ballpark. But me, by trade, I'm a real estate lawyer. So I love the notion of this huge development, incorporating a ballpark and a museum and housing and restaurants and shopping. I think that neighborhood really would benefit to have, listen, we don't have as many people working in offices as they used to, but there's still a lot in the loop. And to be able to go walk to the ballpark after work, maybe slide over during a business person special, I think it would be great. I think it'd be great for the city. I think it would generate a whole lot of revenue once they finally built it and paid the money and invested in the park. I think it really would change the dynamic of the team. I think that there was a lot of hope that New Comiskey was going to change the dynamic, and it unfortunately really never did. We know what the attendance numbers are like, and I think that would change dramatically if there was a club that was in walking distance from the Sears Tower.
Yeah, I mean, and you know what? No matter what, if a team is good for a sustained amount of time, people are going to come to watch and play. But when you're a flash in the pan every 10 years or so, I mean, it's hard to have anybody believe. And Southsiders are Southsiders. I'm one of them. I grew up on the South Side. Yeah. You have to show me before I believe you several times, right? So you win the World Series in 2005. They came out in droves in 2006 and 2007, even though he says they didn't as much as he had hoped. He wanted 3 million fans. Well, they had 2 million fans come through the ballpark. So it's like, come on, man. It's interesting. Politics is interesting. Yeah. And it's interesting whether or not he should be the one that gives White Sox fans a new park, or are White Sox fans expected to pay for yet another new park? Because that's also the narrative, right? So I guess we'll find out. But either way, the book is about Old Comiskey, and people can purchase it now, where can they find the book?
Yeah, sure. It's at lastcomiskeybook.com. Lastcomiskeybook.com. Also, I want to just announce that we're going to have a big book launch event at the Chicago History Museum on May 16th in the evening. Tickets are free, and we're going to have some players on hand. We're hoping if she can get off of her bad ankle, Nancy Faust will be there as well in some form. Whether she's going to play or not, we're not sure yet. Tom Scher is going to be the MC. And we're going to have at least a few players. So far, Don Paul has committed to come, the old pitcher who's a local kid who pitched for the team.
Kid, right?
Evergreen Park, exactly.
Yeah.
He was at Disco Demolition as well. He talks about that in the book. And he's going to be there. And we're trying for a couple more players. I don't want to announce them until they've fully committed, but it's going to be a great event. Matt Flesh, the documentarian, is going to be there. And so it's going to be a great night talking about Old Comiskey, sharing stories. We're going to show an abbreviated version of the documentary. So we hope White Sox fans come. You can get the book at the event, or you can get it in advance at lastcomiskeybook.com. But we're really excited. It's a little bit in enemy territory, but
you're fine.
You know what? That's a special place, that museum. That museum has a great sports exhibit for Chicago history. And they have one of the pinwheels from Old Comiskey Park scoreboard. So it's Sox fans should check that out. Actually, just sports fans in general should check that museum out.
Or
it's a
Chicago
terrific place.
history
Yeah.
buffs. Yeah, no,
I vividly remember it as a kid going there on field trips when it was the Chicago Historical Society, and we're super proud to work with them and have our event at that place. So that's on May 16th. Details are on the book website, also on my website, stadiumvagabond.com. So people can RSVP and come and join us. No purchase is necessary, and we just hope to have a big crowd there.
Ken, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and
Great talking to you.
congratulations on the book.
Thanks so much. Good to talk to you.